welcome to the Battlefield Theologian podcast. Today we have a special guest. We have Ryan Frederick, and he is with his wife in a ministry, Fierce Marriage. You may have heard of that, and also now Fierce Parenting. And so we've got Ryan here with us, and we're going to be discussing this morning, I mean, whenever you're listening to this, it doesn't matter. We're going to be talking about how are we as parents and how are we as husbands and wives still able to pursue each other, still able to date each other while taking care of small kids, and talking about the priority of that. So Ryan, dude, thank you so much for joining us, dude.
Yeah, Ethan, great to be here, man. It's good to chat with you. I followed you for a while on social media, so it's good to actually get to interface. The internet's weird. You think you know someone until you actually talk to them, right?
Yeah. I mean, it really is. You get to these small little sample size relationships, and then it's like, yeah, we know each other. But Ryan, would you mind just kind of give everybody a background of, first start with Fierce Marriage, and then a little bit of a demographic too about you, your wife, how many kids you got, and then also a little bit about Fierce Parenting, and we're going to jump into the show.
Absolutely, yeah. So I'll give you the long and the short of it here. So my wife and I have been married 20 years, and when we were about 9 years into it, we didn't have kids yet. We actually, this is one of my few regrets in life, is not having kids sooner, but that's maybe a different conversation. But right around that time, we had just, I was kind of hitting, I'll say, a quarter life crisis. I'd reached kind of the zenith of what I thought would be an ideal career at like 29. And I thought, man, this is not good. And so I was kind of, I don't know, pleading to God, saying, what do you have for us? And at the time we had been married, like I said, 9 years, and some couples that we knew had been married and tragically divorced in that time that we had been married. And even there was a few that had been married and divorced twice. And I thought, man, what are we doing? I still love my wife. I still like my wife. We're having a good time. Like, life is good. It's not easy, but it's good. And I just felt God impress upon me. Hey, you got this marriage that we've always wanted to give kind of God glory through our dating relationship. We dated in high school and in college and got married at 20. And so we've always wanted to kind of give glory to God in that. And so he said, why don't you just put this on display? Not that we're the example to be followed, but rather to point people to Christ, both in the highs and the lows of our own marriage, our own struggles. And so that's what we started. We started a blog initially, and it's just called Fierce Marriage. And it was really, no one read it. And then over a few years, people started kind of catching on. And our whole goal was just to point people to Christ and to be consistent and then do the best we could do quality-wise with our content. And it just kind of snowballed from there. That turned into a couple of books. We've actually written 9 books on marriage. And then that about 3 years ago, we started Fierce Parenting. And I didn't mention kids, but so we've been married 20 years, but about our oldest is 10 now. And so we have a 10-year-old, we have 4 daughters, a 10-year-old, a 7-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 1-year-old. So parenting's a little different because like there are absolute kind of, we'll say, objective truths that need to be applied to our role as parents, but every family's different. All kids are different. Dynamics are always different. So we hold that one with kind of a looser hand, saying we don't have all the, like, don't do what the Fredericks do, but here, let's just look at scripture and see how it bears its full weight on our situation, your situation, and let's just rally around God's word. So that's Fierce Marriage, Fierce Parenting. Yep.
So your 4 kids, are they all girls, or did your 4th kid, is that now a boy? Because I know you had 3 girls.
So another girl. So 4 girls.
Oh man. So you got to start saving your box tops for education for marriages and stuff.
Brother, you're not kidding. I'm just going to buy 4 goats, and that's going to be their dowries.
There you go.
One goat.
So jumping into the topic here, I'm very curious too, why the word fierce as the descriptor? That's always stood out to me about that.
Yeah, so that was actually, I think, Selena's, her brainchild was the idea of fierce. And the thought comes from the notion that marriage is good, but it takes a fierce tenacity that never gives up and never gives in. And so really rooting ourselves in the covenantal truth of how God designed marriage to function, and then fighting tooth and nail for that. So that's where fierce comes from. Yeah.
Cool, man. So let's jump into the first topic of discussion, is the biblical view of marriage. What should that be like? Because I think a lot of times what happens is the culture paints this view of what marriage should be. And let's face it, I don't think Hallmark does us any favors either about marriage. And so we've got a few verses. We don't have to discuss all of them, but one in particular that I think, since me and you are obviously both husbands of wives, I've been married over 15 years now, you've been married over 20, is Ephesians 5:25, which says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church, and he gave himself up for her. How does that apply into the biblical view of marriage? What's Paul trying to convey here that we can help encourage other men in their marriage in pursuing their wife. Because I think that's what we really want to kind of focus in on here, is that a biblical view of marriage is a husband is continually in pursuit of his wife.
Yeah. So when Paul was writing to the Ephesians, like, that was so upside down for him to say for husbands to love their wives in this way. It was upside down because of the culture, but it was also completely upside down because of the notion of Christ being a king who wasn't a king who came to rule and reign in that moment. He came to die and to give his life as a ransom. And so it would have been very upside down for Paul to say this, and for the Ephesians to hear it, which actually that applies to parenting too, if you go into Ephesians 6, which I'm sure we'll get to a little bit later. But everything he's saying is like upending culturally where these couples, these people, these husbands, these wives who would have been reading this, hearing this letter, it's upending all that they would have grown up to know. And so, that I think is revolutionary. But the idea that husbands love their wives in a sacrificial way. Now, there's something that I felt the burden to really, I think, communicate to husbands, because there's this notion of servant leadership, right? You're familiar with it. It's been all the rage, I think, since the 90s. And it's like, hey, if you want to be like Christ, servant leader, be a servant leader. And that's good, right? We do want to serve our families and we do want to love them sacrificially. But here's, I think, where that's gone awry is, now hear me out, because Christ absolutely served, but Christ was never a servant, like proper, like that noun, right? He came to serve, but he was always king. He was always Lord. And he took on the role of a servant, especially when he washed the disciples' feet. We just got through Holy Week, so that's fresh on all of our minds. But he did not change his role from away from king, away from savior, away from Lord into the servant. Instead, he was the king who served, right? And so I think as husbands, sometimes we use this as kind of a passive, an excuse to be passive in how we love our wives, and that I'm just serving her. I'm going to be the servant. I'm not going to speak up. I'm not going to lead, but instead I'm going to. No, I want to encourage men, like, be the leader by how you serve, but don't ever mistake your role as one that's not the actual leader, right? That's not the head of the house. I know some of this for some people will be like nails on a chalkboard, but this is Paul, not Ryan. So that's one thing that I think that sticks out to me in terms of how revolutionary this would have been. Now, the idea of loving your wife in such a sacrificial way in the name of being a godly head in that household, I think is what men need to hear, and I think wives need to embrace in terms of God's order and design for marriage.
Dude, I couldn't agree with you more. The term servant leadership, yes, 100%. Leaders lead from the front, but then they also go to the rear and help push and motivate people to continue to spur them on up. But specifically in this passage too, it's an imperative command of love your wife. And I think too, what's interesting, and in Titus chapter 2, Paul's writing to Titus, and he is telling the older women to train the younger women on how to love their husbands. So clearly there was an issue at Ephesus that Timothy needed to address when Paul writes to Timothy. And then also when the church in Ephesus was getting written this letter too, is that there's an issue of loving specifically your wife. And I think the love word, sometimes we can almost take that into an idolatrous sense of loving your wife doesn't mean she's your idol. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is I think a lot of guys become soft-spined and weakened because they don't want to do anything that would offend the wife, not because they're not wanting to lead, or maybe that they're nervous by stepping up and being the leader, that they are now somehow unloving in their approach. Now, certainly the approach could be unloving, but the command is nevertheless there that the husbands need to love their wives. And I think to kind of flush that out, how does one love their wife? And I think Paul gives us the answer later on in verse 33 of Ephesians 5. It says, let each of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. And what this is talking about is you can be leading, you can also serve the family, because if you think about it, the husbands should be the primary breadwinners. The husbands should be the hunter-gatherers. The husbands are the one who is given the dominion mandate all the way back in Genesis. So we are the ones that are supposed to be in the fray. We're the ones that are supposed to be on the front line. And at the same time, though, how you take care of yourself and how you love yourself based off of what do you do with your hobbies, your physical activity, or anything else, you need to translate that with your wife. So Ryan, I want to ask you that. How is it, and give me some practical examples too on how you specifically pursue, because I want to say to love your wife and to do even what Paul's saying here in Ephesians 5:33, this is not just something that it should come natural, but I think until you develop that discipline, it's not going to come, just wake up and be like, all right, I'm going to love my wife today. How are you pursuing your wife to show her love as Paul's describing here in Ephesians?
Bro, yeah, you're hitting on so much. So the first thing that came to thought in terms of you mentioned kind of the relegation of the role in the name of loving, right? I'm actually reading a book by Herman Bavinck right now. It's called
Oh, yeah, buddy.
yeah, it's called The Christian
Yeah.
Family. I don't know if you've not read that. I mean, I'm smitten by this book because it's right in my lane in terms of the ministry that God's given us. But he talks about the destruction of the family as we see in Genesis 3, and exactly what's happening between the man and the woman in the garden. And the chief sin of the man was, now, and he makes an argument for this. I'm just going to say it, but he does make an argument for this, is that he essentially, Adam loved Eve more than he loved God.
Yeah.
And he was looking at her, and he was standing there like what he was letting it kind of unfold, and because he had more affection for her in that moment than he had for God. And similarly, said the chief sin of woman is that she, in essence, wanted to be God, right? And so we kind of see those bearing out today in our culture, meaning that I feel like we're a culture that idolizes women. Women can do no evil, right? You can't really question anything that they, because of the toxic masculinity, right? So I think that's where a husband who wants to love his wife well, that has to start with, do you love God more than you love this woman?
Hmm.
I mean, truly love God. Do you fear God? Because that is the font from which all wisdom flows, is the fear of the Lord. So if you're trying to be wise without any, and you're just going straight to your wife saying, that she's somehow the object of your pursuit. Well, really, like, we pursue our wives as a means of stewarding that marriage well in the name of pursuing God, loving God, fearing God more than anyone, than anything. And so I think you start there, and then you start to let wisdom bear its full weight on your relationship, and let discernment show you where your wife is needing to feel loved, where she feels most loved, and how you can then serve her in that way. Now, practically speaking, for us, like, I'm just in the Frederick household, that's me having my head on a swivel kind of always, because as men you can be just very focused. You've got, like you mentioned earlier, you've got your wife locked down, you've got your household more or less locked down, you've got your kids locked down. Now you're pastoring, we're doing ministry, we're doing all this stuff, and it's so easy to just kind of see her as a helpmate that is self-maintaining, right? Whereas like, that's not what nurture is. Nurture and love means you're coming alongside her, looking at her, seeing her. So for my wife, the way I really show her that affection is if she leaves, she takes our kids to choir once a week. I'll text her, say, hey, I'm thinking of you, praying for you, I hope it's going well. Or she's taking them to co-op. We do home education. So on Mondays, she's at co-op. I'm actually there for the first part of it. Then I leave. I'll send her a message. Hey, I'm thinking about you, praying for you. Hey, how can I help you tonight? Because she's always really kind of worn out after that. And so I'll say, I got dinner, which usually means I'm ordering pizza or something like that.
Always.
So for us, that's what really works now. And then finding in the margins the places where we can actually connect, whether it's the mornings, evenings, or nap times. Just making sure that I'm not on my phone. I'm not just in my laptop, because there's always something to do, right? But closing the phone, closing the laptop, and saying, hey, how are you doing? Let's talk. Let's check in. How am I loving you well? How can I love you better? How's our communication been? So on and so forth. So.
Yeah, dude, you hit on something that I really like is you didn't say this, but your wife. You know her love language. You know how she responds. And by other guys, if you're listening, maybe your wife doesn't respond well to just a text of encouragement, but you need to know, like, what is it that your wife is receptive to? What is it that your wife responds to? And what I like to call is, like, do heart checks. Hey, how you doing?
Yeah.
What's God been teaching you? How can I encourage you? And I don't think there's anything wrong with asking. If you're not sure, because I think so often guys think that they know their wives, and we should know them to a level, but marriage is a living organism, and it's continuing you're growing deeper and deeper in love, and things change, desires change, motivations change. And you need to be open to connect with your wife, to ask her, hey, what's going on in your life? Because as we know, women are complex creatures. And when they say, if you're like, hey, is everything fine? No, I'm good. That's a hint to say, right, okay, I need to dig in a little bit more. And I think for a lot of men, communication is a struggle point for them. And what you're talking about is you're maintaining throughout the day open communication with your spouse. And I think that's critical. You cannot over communicate with your spouse, because in that communication, you're able to root out potential, quarrels that might come up from a misunderstanding. Or what I see, the biggest thing that affects marriages is unmet expectations. An expectation that I had for my wife that I never articulated, or an unmet expectation she had for me that she's never articulated. And until you actually sit down with each other and talk, how are you ever going to know how to best lead and encourage your wife? Because leading your wife isn't like well, this is how I'm going to lead, and there's only one way of leading. You have to understand, what does she respond best to? Coming from a military background, I cannot treat my wife as a subordinate, as a junior enlisted individual, as a senior NCO. I couldn't have just been like, all right, you're going to do this, this, and this. That's probably not the best tact. So I think there's got to be tact. How do you develop tact with your spouse?
Well, there's the cliche, right? Leaders are readers. Well, that's talking about books, but I think what you're indicating is that you need to be able to read your wife and see in between the lines what is happening and discern. And so I think a lot of husbands think if they can't see it right in front of their face, it's not there to be found. And so instead, taking a posture of humility and saying, yeah, there's something here. Now, where I see a lot of couples falter in this is that you've got, like, communication doesn't break down overnight. It's broken down over years of bad habits, of bad communication, of disregard for one another. It's broken down over all this time. And then all of a sudden a husband steps up to the plate and is trying to hit home runs every time, but he hasn't swung the bat in 3 years. Like, that husband is a fool if he gives up after it doesn't work. And so that they need to recognize, okay, our communication is in a bad spot. Like, that's the first thing you have to get out in the open and say, we have not done this well. Husband, own your role in that. It's not all your fault, but some of it is. And so own your role and acknowledge that and say, hey, I'm here. This is a covenantal marriage. I'm not going anywhere. I want to have a good marriage with you. So I'm going to work on communication. I'd like for you to work on it with me. And I'm going to keep working on it, even if you don't trust me to do that. And so that's where a lot of couples will falter. And husbands who fail to recognize that they need to play the long game is that they'll say, okay, this week I'm going to, I listened to the podcast with Ryan and Ethan. I know I need to be a better communicator. So I'm going to set out to text my wife, to communicate, to check in, and they do it for a week and they think, that did nothing. Mm-hmm. She doesn't seem any closer to me. She's not responding. She's still cold. Our marriage is still, not where it needs to be. Well, I want to encourage those husbands, like, that's just the beginning. And that's what being a leader means. That's what being a head means, is that you see the horizon and you know where you're headed and you realize fully that you need to go there because you're not there. So don't expect the fruit when you haven't spent the time, planting the seeds, and have the patience and the fortitude to stick with it. So I don't know if that exactly answers your question, but that's my encouragement for men typically, is like, you can get better at communicating. And as long as you have the wherewithal to see the kind of the horizon for what it is, stick with it. Don't give up. Trust that the fruit will come.
And I think what you hit on too is a character of humility, is what you described about you coming to your wife saying, hey, I know I haven't done the best, but will you help me with this? Mm-hmm. Is that takes a bit of humbleness to go to your spouse and admit when you're wrong, and be willing to hear her say, yeah, you haven't been doing a great job, but I love you anyway. And we're still going to work through this. Is when you entered into that marriage with your spouse, you covenanted with your spouse before God. So you've got to view it as a covenant. It's not something that you can just break. And I think so often with our culture, like you said at the beginning of the show, multiple divorces and stuff like that, is like, quitting is not an option. I got to fight for this no matter what. And in good times and bad, in sickness and health, just because something's getting tough, that's when you double down. Like, that's when the true test. And as Peter says in 1 Peter, is like, when you're going through sufferings and trials, don't be surprised. But at the end of that, when you look back, you can realize that your salvation's still intact. Same thing in marriage. When you go through these hard times and these trials, and, whatever the thing is in your marriage, that refines, that solidifies, that strengthens your marriage. So don't look at the difficult times as a hindrance. Look at this as a deepening of your commitment to each other, knowing like, babe, because I guarantee, Ryan, you can reflect back on your 20 years, and you and Selena have been through some stuff, just like my wife and I have been through some stuff. We can look back like, dude, there's no other way we could have gone through this with our marriage intact if we did not keep that open levels of communication and admitting our mistakes and being humble to each other,
Yeah. And I'm curious to hear your experience on this, but I'm amazed at my own lack of, like, I'll say up until about 30, like my mid 30s, which is not forever ago, but it was 15 years into our marriage. Up until that point, I was pretty emotionally immature. Like, I didn't have emotional intelligence. And I'm not like big in the, know your feelings, all that kind of stuff. I get that there's a cliff to fall off there. I mean, that you're always navel gazing, all that kind of stuff. What I'm saying is being aware of exactly what's happening in your own heart, and being mature enough and cognizant enough to say, wow, I'm actually bad at this. Now, you mentioned humility. Well, a lot of guys are even a step before humility. They don't even recognize that there's a problem. because they've not been shown a good example of it. They've not been able to put words to it. So I'm curious, is that what's, and I'm turning the tables here, I'm asking you the question. Has that been your experience as well? I mean, in terms of your own life and the ministry that with the guys that you've spoken with?
So to answer that question, what early on in our marriage, what I had to learn that Diane and I were lacking was I was leading her physically, but I wasn't taking that into the spiritual realm. I remember my wife would want to sit down and would want to talk about the things of the Lord. And I remember distinctly saying, hey, that's you, that's you and between you and God. And this is between me and God. Cause the culture I grew up in, I just remember, seeing all these guys talking theology. And I'm like, man, these guys are just trying to brag about like how big their brain is and the big words. And then my wife continually encouraged me. She's like, you need to be leading me spiritually. And I wasn't. For the first 3-4 years of our marriage, I wasn't. We were going to church. I was serving in the local church, in between deployments and stuff like that. And, we would pray together. We would read the Bible occasionally together, but I would never just sit and teach her or talk about the things of the Lord with her. And then one day it was like God just sledgehammered me to the chest of like, Ethan, you're not leading your wife spiritually. There's more to it than just the physical leading. Yeah. And that's when truly, man, our marriage blossomed. It was like, I was the one depriving the marriage of the fertile water of the spiritual nourishment that would grow and deepen our roots. And until I started to tap into that vein, which is what God has always intended with, when we leave and cleave, we become one person, we become one flesh. And that's not just in the physical sense, and that's in the spiritual sense. And then I started to view my wife, this is my sister in Christ before she's my wife. And I'm presenting and getting her ready for eternity. And so that kind of revolutionized the way in which I viewed marriage with my wife. And one thing that I've been encouraging guys as well with is you don't know that there's anything wrong. And hopefully your wife will bring that up to you, just like my wife did. But then are you willing to hear and are you teachable enough? Because I'm not so ignorant to think that I can't learn from my wife. That would be a very egotistical thing that, there's nothing my wife could teach me. Even as a pastor, right. When I'm preparing sermons and stuff, she'll look at a passage and I'll be like, hey, what'd you think of this? And she'll say something like, man, that was good. I don't even know. That's fantastic. And so there's that mutual teachability that's happening between the two of us.
Yeah. Well, that's why they're called the helpmate, right? Fit for Adam, right? Up until the creation of Eve, it was good. It was good. And then all of a sudden Adam was alone. It was not good. And then God's response to that was to create him a helpmate who was fit for him. And that's what you're describing is that, it's one thing to be a guy who's, again, we're speaking to men here in this case. A lot of men are not helpable because they're not leading anywhere. They're not going anywhere. They're not about any real God work, if that makes sense. Sure, they're going to work. Maybe they're building a household in a sense. But when you have a helpmate that's designed fit for you to help you and you're not actually doing anything that's helpable, I think that's where you start to feel like she can't bring anything to the table. Now, when you switch you flip that switch, you said your marriage blossomed. And I think that's been my experience as well. And as soon as I realized all that it meant, and not just, and we're going to the parenting side too, but not just in my wife's life, like she is that fruitful vine around the table, and the table, there's the olive shoot children sprouting up around that table. They're all the result of being watered by the word. Yeah. Right. And so your whole household begins to flourish the more the husbands step up and lead in a godly, loving way.
So this is going to be my transition question into getting into parenting, because this applies not just in the marriage, but then also specifically into parenting. And I think you're going to see where I'm going with this. As Ephesians 5:31 says, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. One thing that I've seen a lot of is the influence of parents and in-laws in the marriage. And then specifically too, the influence, both good, bad, and indifferent in parenting. So a lot of times, again, early in your marriage, I mean, Diane and I, we were not near family. There was family nowhere near us to us. So the only kind of quasi family we had was the church that we would be involved in if we were involved in a good local church, because that was another whole other story. Is how do you navigate, or what advice would you give a young couple? I'm thinking the first year, 2 years of marriage, because I remember when my wife and I first got married, we were looking to make a decision. There's nothing wrong with seeking godly counsel from your parents, but I think there's a line that gets crossed though, in which you're not a unit making decisions based off of the information that you have with the time, money, and resources, but you've got these outside influences constantly swaying the couple unit there. Does that make sense what I'm saying here?
Yeah.
Okay.
So what I hear you are articulating, yeah, you need to be open to godly counsel, like you said, but yeah, there's a sense in which that can encroach upon maybe the less objective parts of what you have to decide on. And you need to be able to kind of, eat the meat and spit out the bones, so to speak. And one of the ways that we've got, I'm blessed in that my mother-in-law is incredible. She's a great addition to our family. Our parents on our wedding night, as we left our wedding venue in a boat. We live in the Puget Sound, so we crossed the water. And as we were leaving, they're watching us, and they told us what that conversation they were having while we were leaving was, all right, we're not going to get involved. We're not going to interfere. Now, they weren't saying they were going to be passive, but they decided that they were going to let us work it out, in terms of marriage and family and stuff. So I'm a little bit of an anomaly in that. But what we've helped couples do is we say, okay, you need to understand the exact problems that are happening. Where exactly are they encroaching in unhealthy ways? You need to set up boundaries. Okay, when it comes to our kids, you're not allowed to discipline them in this way. Or when it comes to our marriage, if we're fighting, you're not allowed to take sides. Like, those are clear boundaries that you need to have in place for your in-laws. And this is the hard part. It's hard, then it gets easier. You have to articulate lovingly what those boundaries are. Now, they may or may not be receptive to that. That's between them and God and themselves, right? But you articulate what those boundaries lovingly are. And one of the most helpful things is, you don't just say, these are the boundaries, stay out. You say, these are the boundaries, help us keep these boundaries in place, because boundaries are meant for keeping things out, but they're also meant for keeping healthy things in. And that there is a spot within that boundary where the parents need to be. And so inviting them to help you enforce those boundaries. And then where it gets hard again is if they do break the boundary, you need to recognize and enforce the boundary. And that can come with all sorts of implications. Maybe take some time away from that family member if it's really toxic, or whatever's appropriate for that time. So establishing the boundaries, inviting them to help you maintain the boundaries. Why? Not just so we can keep you away, but because we want to have a thriving and healthy marriage, and you can help us to that end.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm blessed with great in-laws and my parents as well. But I think often what can happen if you're not careful is that, however long, especially too, if you get married later in age, right? So let's just say you're getting married at 25. So for 25 years now, you've been under your parents' authority, your father's headship, and then now you get married, and you need to start, for the wife, you need to start listening and respecting and submitting to what the husband's saying. And then the husband needs to be loving, serving, and helping the wife and the family unit. But at the same time, at what point in time, though, do you make the decision that there needs to be a clear time in which the wife now knows, hey, I can't just, like, if, let's just say my wife and I are talking about buying a new kitchen table. Hey, this is the kitchen table we're going on, this and this. Well, I need my mom to say yes or no to this. My wife's never done this, but I'm just giving an example here.
Sure.
And I think that could end up throwing monkey wrenches into the marital unit, because now you're not becoming one flesh. It's still Ethan's got to run and ask his dad permission, or Diane's got to go run and ask her mom permission. And it's not you guys leaving and cleaving, which is what you're supposed to do. And especially too with parenting, when you first have your first kid, everyone has every opinion on how you need to raise your child. Everyone has every opinion on how to discipline your child, where they should go to school, what they shouldn't go to school for. You shouldn't homeschool, or you should public school, or you shouldn't do all this other stuff. Listen to that advice, but there needs to be a line in which you will say, okay, we're good. We've got all the intel. Now we've got to make the decision on our own, and you've got to own that decision. Whether it was a good or a bad decision, you have to be willing to, especially you as the husband, you've got to be willing to take ownership, say, hey, I chose that we're going to homeschool the kids, or I chose that we're going to keep our kids in public school. And that's the decision. I made that decision. My wife and I, we discussed this, so I need you to be okay with this. And I think I like what you said, Ryan, about articulating those boundaries, not necessarily to keep them out, but it's a protection mechanism. So that way there doesn't become some form of disunity from the in-laws into your marital relationship as well.
Yeah. Yeah. There's, I think a balance there, right? Because there is a sense where we're not infallible, as heads of our household. And if there's godly advice coming in and we're rejecting that on the basis of, this is my decision, deal with it, that can become a problem, because there's a lack of humility there. There's a lack of wisdom being applied, if it is wisdom coming in. And so where I think that falls in on the spectrum that we're talking about is you've got complete independence where from in-laws, meaning that I don't, and this is more of a Western modern concept where, like, I am somehow isolated away from my family, right? Or from my ancestors, so to speak. Well, that's fairly recent. It's fairly modern, and I don't think it's biblical. I think there independence from your parents is not necessarily a biblical thing. Now, I'm going to qualify this. On the far other end of the spectrum, you have codependence, right? And that's, I think, what you're describing, where I can't make a decision without my dad's input, or she can't buy a table without her mom giving the thumbs up. That's a codependence. Maybe it could lean that way. But I think there's a healthy spot in the middle, which I would call interdependence, where you're actually, I'm going to my father because my father's wise. He's going to weigh in, but I'm not hinging my decision on what he says. I know that I'm the one at the wheel by God's decree. I'm responsible, not him, for my household. And so, yeah, I'm going to let him weigh in. And like I said earlier, take any wisdom I can get, but also have the discernment to reject any foolishness that I need to reject prayerfully. That doesn't harm the relationship, because your father could be offended if you don't take his advice, that sort of thing. So I think there's a healthy balance there where you are interdependent and not codependent, not completely independent from your parents. But yeah, it's a fine line to walk, man. It's not easy. Yeah.
So now with that, I love what you said. Let's talk about, since I kind of gave us the example of a young couple married a few years, you didn't fall into this category, but I did. Within our first year of marriage, we had a kid. It wasn't planned. It wasn't unplanned. It just kind of happened. But one thing that I see lacking a lot of these days, especially with parents who are either A, early on in their marriage, or B, it doesn't matter if they've been married 5 to 15 years and then they start having kids, is either A, they didn't have the ability to start the routine, if you will, or the criteria of regular dating each other. And then, so early on, you're married a year, you didn't really have that opportunity to establish kind of like that focus of, hey, we're going to date. We're going to go on a date every Thursday or Friday. Now you got kids. Well, now we can't date. We can't take our kids with us. Or now you've been married 5 years. So you did have this normal kind of sequence, if you will, of dating, and now you don't. So I want to talk about, how can we in our marriage with young kids, and by young kids, I'm saying under the age of 10, kids that they can't just stay at home and babysit themselves. How do you date your wife? Because like we've said, is, you're pursuing your wife, you're leading your wife. And one way we need to lead our wife is continue to hone our love for each other. And you can very easily become distant apart if you're not having, in my opinion, regular date nights and prioritizing your spouse. Because I think what happens is we can use the kids almost as an excuse. The wives can do it, the husbands can do it. Well, we can't do that because little Johnny's got baseball practice, or we can't do that because little Johnny's this, or whatever else. Is the kids. What I like to tell people, and then I want to flip this over to you, is even with kids, your wife has to come first. Kids are second. Because if my wife and I are off, we're not going to be able to steward our children well. So how is it that you've navigated this? Because I love your example, because you guys were married how many years before you had kids again?
9. Yeah.
9. So perfect example. So you guys were probably in like a regular routine of dating, and then you had kids. How did you navigate that transition of not having kids, kind of independent? You guys can do your own things. You could go out hunting for days on end, and just like your wife's cool with it. She could go out shopping or whatever else. And then now you got kids. Now it's like all eyes back in on the house. How did you continue to pursue each other in date nights with little kids?
I will say we weren't great at this before we even had kids because, well, I don't have any hobbies. Like, work is my hobby. And so that's probably a bad thing. My wife was into horses for a while. Anyway, we didn't really do this well. So I'll just preface it with this. And this is something we've developed over the last 10 years in our own marriage. And me as the husband, is seeing your wife, okay, as she is, right? If you read Song of Solomon, see how he adores this woman. If you read through scripture, I think it's Malachi, where it talks about, they've forsaken the wife of their youth, and you go all the way back or up forward into 1 Corinthians 11, when Paul's talking about the wife is the crown, or the husband is the glory of the image of God, and the wife is the glory of her husband. Like, she is the glory of the glory, right? So seeing her as like truly this sight to behold, and then from there to have what I would call a wife word or a home word orientation as a husband. So you mentioned hunting. Like, that wife absolutely knows if you have a hunting orientation, a hunting word orientation, where you're always kind of leaning out the door, right, to go do whatever it is she's keeping you from doing. switch that around and instead let the primary, their body weight be on the inward foot, right? Where you're stepping toward the household. You have a wifeward orientation in that you're always wanting her, more of her friendship, more of understanding where she's at. That's a wifeward orientation, I think, is the key. Because if you have an outward orientation, you're always trying to get out and do something else, and you hear a podcast like this and we say you need to date your wife, she's gonna smell that a mile away, that you're just trying to check a box so you can get back to whatever it is you're trying to do. And so we're not saying idolize your wife, but instead like see her as your glory. Like she is the font of beauty and goodness and life in a very literal sense in your household. From her, life springs. And like, what a thing to behold. So have a wifeward orientation. With that in mind, I think it just becomes a matter of pragmatics and a matter of being able to be creative, to prioritize, to be proactive in finding exactly what works for you. No two couples are the same, especially if you have young kids. For us, we found rhythms between mornings and nights and naps, right? When the kids are up and they're in full steam, we have one trick up our sleeves. We have two. One, in terms of us getting time to connect. And usually that means like intimacy or just otherwise, just having time to talk. Our two tricks are this: we get someone to come take care of the kids, so you're taking them out of the equation, or we put them in front of a movie and we say, watch this because we need to talk. We need to those are our two tricks. So we realize that's not sustainable. We can't just have them in front of a TV all the time. That's not healthy. And we don't have babysitters 24/7. So we found the margins and the gaps in the mornings, nights, and naps. And for us, the big thing that we use is coffee time. So I'm up at 5:36. She's up at around the same time. We have about an hour and a half where we can talk. We're reading the Bible. We're discussing what we're reading. But more than anything, I'll just hear what's on my wife's heart because she's fresh, I'm fresh. That's our date. Now, that being said, I do love a good, going out to a restaurant or whatever. And we try to do that at least once or twice a month. But that's the rhythm we found. So that's obviously not going to work for everyone. So I say, if you have a wifeward orientation, you have a homeward orientation, then just, you got to have your head up, prioritize, be creative, be proactive, and you'll figure it out.
I love what you said there because we do similar things. We focus every evening, we date every single evening, but it doesn't mean we're going out somewhere. And one way we got into that rhythm is bedtime for our kids, and it hasn't changed, and it probably won't for a long time. On the button, 7:30, it's bedtime. Now, my son's 13. He'll be 14 at the end of this year. And people may think, well, man, that's kind of early. They don't necessarily have to fall asleep, but they can read their book. They can color, they can draw, but they're locked down, not locked down. That sounds bad, especially with what we've been through. But their home base now is their room. They know that they're not coming out, even though they might come out and get water or something. And I always tell them, I said, you guys are going to bed at 7:30 because your mom and I need time together. And the later on that bedtime is, you're going to get distractions if you and your wife are in a conversation and then your kid comes up and wants to talk to you, you're not going to have that opportunity without it being invaded, if you will, by your kids. And so that's one thing that we do is every single night, 7:30, they're in bed. We put them all, we pray with them all in each one of the rooms, kiss them, tell them good night. And then we sit on the couch and we might watch a movie together. We might talk, like last night. We just talked for a long time about something. And so it's just carving out actual time, quality time for each other, and getting away from date night means we're going and to all you can eat Olive Garden breadsticks or going to a movie. If you can do that, like what you said, we try to do that maybe once a month, twice a month if we can. And we're blessed now that my son's old enough where he can watch his sisters, where we don't have to hire a babysitter, especially too if we're only like 5 minutes away. So I think that's important. And I think people use their kids as an excuse to not date each other in that way. And I think you may not feel the ramifications of that right now, but you got one kid and that kid's dominating your life, and you're not letting your kid just put them in the crib, let them cry it out. They're fed, they're changed, they're not hungry. It's okay for them to cry. That's fine. That they're just getting a little energy, and then you guys spend time together. Because what's going to happen when you have two kids? Because I remember when we had our first kid, someone's like, "Oh, just wait till you have two," and then we had two, and they're like, "Oh, just wait till you have three." I'm like, is there ever a point in time where I'm going to crescendo this mountain and like, you now have arrived at what parenting is going to be like? It's just like, no, it's always going to be adding more stuff. Yeah, that's what it. Oh, and then now it's like, oh, we'll wait till they're a teenager. Oh, we'll wait till you have to start planning a wedding. It's like, got it, dude. Like, Roger that. we'll figure it out as we go along, but we're creating rhythms and habits right now that we're going to continue on. And hopefully too, we're showing our kids how their spouse needs to be prioritizing them. So it's kind of
Mm.
twofold is I'm
Yep.
prioritizing my wife and my kids are observing this. They know, hey, we go to bed because that's mommy and daddy time. That's when they're hanging out on the couch, they're talking, they're watching a movie, and they see that this is a priority. So that way, I'm hoping that my girls see that that's a man that they're looking for who
Hmm.
prioritizes them. And my son, I'm hoping that he sees that's how he needs to prioritize his wife. Um, so now I want to switch it
Yeah.
up a little bit on you with date night. Have you had any interesting, fun uh, inventions in your date night, whether it's at home, taking her somewhere? What does that look like? Are kids involved? Are they not involved? Just what are some unique ways that you and Selena have dated
Mm.
each other in your marriage?
Yeah. I'll say we're we're the marriage people. Like we have the ministry, all that kind of stuff. Like we're pretty uncreative. I'll say we live in a beautiful spot, and so our go-to, if we have time and the kids aren't involved, we will just go and see where the wind takes us, so to speak. And so we'll end up. An ideal day would be if we've got a morning. Like I would prefer the morning to the afternoon, but that's obviously not possible for everyone all the time. But breakfast, on the water somewhere. And
Hmm.
we have a boat, and we go out in that. It's not a big boat, but it's a boat, and we'll go out and in that. We've actually done overnights on that as a date night. Not more than a date night, but that's awesome. In terms of at home, like what the most creative I can get is play a game, watch a movie, do something that you enjoy. That's not just here's an idea, not just focused on you. I know that's kind of against what we were saying earlier. Like there's a time for that to check in, say how are you, how do you think I'm doing, have those conversations. But there's also a time to just say, hey, let's play a game together. Let's have fun together. Let's do something where we are not just focusing on us. And what happens is that fun will bond you. The laughter will bond you. Laughter, I think, is one of the quickest ways to break down walls and to bring cohesion and unity back to your marriage if that's where you're lacking, because then you can actually start talking about some of the more vulnerable spots in your heart and maybe things that you need to work on. So whatever would facilitate laughter and enjoyment of one another. And also, I'll say this: setting a stage for that sort of thing to happen. So, actually, light a candle, put out some glasses of wine instead of just sitting on the couch and seeing what happens. Maybe sit at the dinner table and have some questions prepared. It doesn't take a lot. We actually have a book, 2 books. It's Husband in Pursuit and Wife in Pursuit. And it's a 31-day challenge to that end. And so there's some more intense challenges. There's also some stuff like this in there where you just, as a husband, you're pursuing your wife. As a wife, she's pursuing her husband. So there's really the sky's the limit. But for us, laughter, setting the stage, doing fun stuff together, that's kind of always been the ticket.
Man, I like that. I think when you rewrite the script on what a successful date night is or what a creative date night is, um, it may not be a Pinterest looking date night at home playing Uno, but that's you actively spending time away from your phone, away from any other distraction, and just you're focused solely on her.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that will go a long way. So
Mm-hmm.
wrapping up here, question I have for you. Uh, I want to flip this on how we can. I don't mean to project and assume how a wife would do it for a husband, but I think based off of your years of marriage, my years of marriage, we can kind of come to some kind of an agreement. But if someone's listening to this and the husband's thinking, man, okay, I need to start leading, I need to start pursuing, and I need to start dating my wife, but I don't know how to start. How do I begin this? What would you say to a husband who's thinking he feels one, we're not trying to convict you of like you're a rotten husband, but we're trying to spur you up for good works, saying, hey, you need to be doing this. What would you say to him on how does he start this? How does he get into this?
Hmm. These answers are always kind of annoying because they're really easy to say but harder to implement. And so, and the concepts are simple, but the execution is not easy. I'll say that. And so here's all I would say to that husband who generally you have a good marriage. You're not going through crisis. You're not coming out of a crisis. I would say just start with that premise that you've just articulated right there, and go to your wife and say, I want to start leading you better. I love you. I want to do a good job. Like full stop. I want to honor the Lord with our marriage. Like, how, like, I can't show me a wife who wouldn't just be smitten by a man who comes to her and says, I love you and I want to lead you better. I'm going to do it. Here's how I'm going to try to do better. And I just want you to know, and I want you to be ready. Be ready for where that takes us, because it's going to bring us closer together. It's going to bring us closer to God. It's going to let our family flourish. Our kids are going to see X, Y, and Z that you've just described. They're going to see us loving each other well. And here's all the reasons for that. Like, honestly, that's the easy answer. A lot of guys, believe it or not, struggle with that because they feel like, well, they can't, either they feel like their wife won't respect because he's been neglecting that responsibility for so long. And my encouragement to that man is say, do it anyway. And if she's not giving you her respect, earn it. She does need to give it at some point. Like, she needs to give it, because respect is both earned, but it's also given. And that's, by the way, we didn't read this, but in Ephesians, Paul says, wives, respect your husbands. That's her cross to bear. But step up to the plate. Let her know you're stepping up to the plate, and just commit to not backing down, and enjoy the process.
So now I'm going to flip the script now. What would you say to a wife whose husband isn't doing that? How could she encourage the husband in a respectful manner to say, hey, I want you to date me? Like, how would, what would you, or how would you, we should have grabbed one of our wives in for this one, but how would you want to encourage a wife in that way?
Yeah. So it's really hard, because it's a whole, like, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. And so the husband does need to have some wherewithal and some desire to do this. But I think the key to a husband's heart is, well, Paul nails it: respect, admiration, acknowledgement. Like, I don't know about you, man, but when my wife comes to me and says, I'm so glad to be your wife, I'm proud of you. I see what you do. You're effective at your work. You're doing good work. Keep going. Right. She was, I was going, so I'm a chaplain for our minor league baseball team here in Tacoma area. And we did an Easter service, and I don't know if you remember the movie 300 when,
please. Who doesn't remember that?
Yeah. Okay. It's unforgettable. When he goes off, when Leonidas goes off to war, what does his wife say? She says, come back with your shield or on it. Yeah. Right. And that's what a husband needs to hear. Like, you are sending me out to battle, and you're telling me, like, either die or come back, like, victorious. And so to me, that's a sign of her trusting me. You're putting your confidence in me. You're admiring me. And so a wife who wants her husband to lead in this way, like, don't start with, you're a bad husband, you need to lead me better. You need to pursue me more. I feel unloved by you. Instead, say, here's all the things I love and admire about you. This is why I married you. You're the man that I wanted to spend my life with. Here's where I feel like we can grow. I don't feel like we're connecting. I don't feel like we're communicating well. I don't feel like maybe we're doing all we can do in terms of our spiritual lives together. I want to grow in this with you, and see how that's a totally different script as opposed to, here's how you suck. Now it's, here's how I believe in you and how I want to grow with you. And to me, any man that's worth his salt he'll puff up his chest. He'll put on his work boots, and he'll get to it. And he may not be perfect, but at least I think that's the start of that conversation.
That's really good, man. I don't think I could say it any better. Well, Ryan, as we close this out, what are some resources if someone's listening and they want to further delve into this? You kind of already mentioned Wife in Pursuit and Husband in Pursuit. What's some other resources or courses, because you guys offer courses as well, that you would recommend to either one, individuals, and or two, couples, and three, do you have something for single people who are looking at that next stage in their life?
So I'll answer the last one first. Is I'm working on that. We don't have that currently available, something for singles who are wanting to kind of gear their minds in a way that is conducive to marriage. So look for that later. But in terms of helping married couples, we kind of have, they each accomplish a certain thing. So we have a book that's meant to establish unity, but it's very basic. But if you're just kind of new to the faith and you're wanting to grow together, that's called 2 as 1. And it's like, you can go through it in 5 minutes, and it will ask you questions. You'll go into God's word. And to me, that the objective of that book is to get on the same page in terms of where you're headed in your spiritual lives together. That's called 2 as 1. And then we have 2 books, and I mentioned, Husband in Pursuit, Wife in Pursuit. That's for if you want to just grow closer together and you want to pursue one another. We also have a pair of books called 40 Prayers for My Husband and 40 Prayers for My Wife. A lot of couples, so if you classify it like this, pursuit. So pursuit handles all the things that are within my power to do as a husband, all the things that I'm called to do. Now, prayer are all the things that are outside of my control. I need to trust God with my wife's heart. I need to trust him to change her heart, help her with whatever the thing is. So that's the prayer books. And then finally, our latest books are actually How a Husband Speaks, How a Wife Speaks. And so these are my favorite ones so far, probably because they're the last ones we've written. But the whole point of those is to help couples really clear the lines of communication. Because if you can get communication dialed, there's virtually nothing that can stand in your way from a stronger, healthier marriage, as long as you are communicating clearly and honestly. And so, I went too long on that part, but you can find all that stuff on our website. Just go to fiercemarriage.com, or actually shop.fiercemarriage.com, and all our books are available there.
Then last one, what about for parenting? What are some, one, I'm going to limit you now, one recommended parenting resource that you guys got?
Family worship, man, changes everything. So if you don't know what family worship is, we have go to fierceparenting.com. There's a resources tab, and there's a family worship guide that you can download. Sorry, you can't download it, but it's a page that kind of reads like a book. Just check that out. Get started on family worship. It changed our whole family when we started doing it. That's
awesome. Well, Ryan, dude, thanks so much for joining us. I hope that for those listening, this was super helpful for you guys. I know I enjoyed this. Dude, I just appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to join me on the podcast, bro.
Absolutely, Ethan. Thanks for having me. It's a joy.
All right. Catch you guys next time.